Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from Jock McFarty. Bonus for a speedy job? Count me in. Let's jump right in. Not my malicious compliance, but I did witness the fallout. Some background. At the time, late 1970s, I was working for a Scottish bank as a junior operator of a pair of 370-158 mainframes leased from a big computer manufacturer that liked the color blue. These had been there a couple of years longer than me. One day, I came into work to find both of the comfy swivel chairs at the consoles had been replaced with 2 to 3 boxes of 2-part screen listing, green-lined computer paper with carbon paper between every sheet. Not very comfy at all. On querying WTF was going on, it transpired that there was a great disturbance in the force, or to be more specific, static electricity seemed to be the cause of intermittent hardware interrupts and unexpected IPLs, reboots of the mainframes. The workaround that seemed to work best was to use this large stack of insulation to protect the consoles from the people operating them. After a few days of investigation and data gathering, the vendor's engineer finally announced that he'd tracked down the root cause of their or our problems, fade to 3 years earlier. You see, when installing hugely expensive mainframes to an incredibly tight timescale, this vendor likes to make sure that deadlines are met no matter what, in order to comply with SLAs, service level agreements with the customer. So there had been a bonus on offer to the original engineer if he could complete the installation by date X. Well, wouldn't you know it, he was just about finished and right up against the clock when he realized that he needed a junction box to connect the consoles via underfloor cables to the PDU, power distribution unit, or electricity supply. A reliable, industry-approved box could be sourced from the warehouse, but it would take until next day to arrive. What to do? So the temptation of that big fat bonus was just too much for him, and surely a junction box is a junction box, right? I'm not sure if he was being malicious or just greedy, but he nipped out to the nearest branch of rhymes with moolies, snapped one up for a couple of quid, and a few minutes later, job done. Technically, he'd complied with the requirements to win his bonus. Fallout: 3 years later, that moolie's junction box failed and nearly put a major bank out of business. You know, if this ever got back to the technician, I'm sure it would be grounds for dismissal. And don't be shocked that I'd make a pun like that, I just happen to have a spark of inspiration. Do me a quick favor and take a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're actually not subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. This next story comes to us from Spoods McBeef. My boss demanded I serve all customers and fill all shelves, no matter how far past closing hours it was. Let's jump right in. So, my first job I ever worked at for a few years was a grocery retail store, with several different departments, including a deli for lunch meat and cheese, which is where I worked. One night, I was working 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. 9 p.m. is when the deli and other special departments closed, and we're expected to be done and clocked out. But the rest of the store remained open 24/7 for general groceries. It was me and one other guy. We had an especially busy night, and we were a little behind on our cleaning as a result. But we had our meat slicing machines already coated with sanitizer after working for 15 minutes to get all the little meat chunks and shavings out of every corner, as we were pretty serious about making sure those things were clean as can be. It's about 8:55 at this point, we're almost late to leave, and the store we worked for did not like overtime. If you were getting any amount of overtime, you would get chewed out the next day for it, even for a little amount. A woman walks up to the counter and starts looking through the product, as we had a glass case filled with a bunch of types of our lunch meats, pre-sliced and ready to go for bagging up. She looks at one and says, "I want this turkey right here, but I want it freshly sliced." I, of course, look to my coworker, and we both can see the 2 slicers we have are still covered in the sanitizer we use and are drying, as per the food safety protocol written on the bottle that says to allow 20 to 30 minutes minimum for the sanitizer to dry after application. I tell her, "Well, ma'am, we really can't do that right now. Our slicers are both being cleaned at the moment, as the department is closed in 5 minutes. But I'd be glad to get you something here from our cold case." "So you're not going to slice it fresh for me? That's what you're saying?" I replied, "That's correct, I apologize." Without another word, she walks away, and myself and my coworker go back to what we were doing. And we finish cleaning and go home after about 5 more minutes, narrowly clocking out on time. Fast forward 2 days later, me and the same coworker come in and start getting to work like a normal day. About 3 p.m., 2 hours into my shift, I personally get called into the head honcho's office. The store director, as they're titled. I think nothing of it and head on upstairs and go inside the office and sit down. The store director hands me a piece of paper and says, "Tell me what caused this." I look at the paper and it's a printed out screenshot of a Google review for our store. 1 star out of 5. And a full paragraph from that lady of 2 nights before complaining that she didn't get her freshly sliced meat from the rude employee and then described specifically me. I explained exactly what happened 2 nights prior, as clearly as I'm typing it out here. The director is getting heated and begins to cut me off while I'm speaking, asking, "Why would slicers be covered in sanitizer at 8:55? You're scheduled to work until 9 p.m. I said, "Yes, I am." But seeing as I'm constantly being reminded not to get any overtime, so I usually start cleaning them around 8:30. The director gets even more upset and raises her voice. "I don't care. That's not how it works. If you have a customer, you serve them. And you'd better start making sure those shelves are filled before you leave, or you won't be working here anymore. Now get out." I'm pretty salty at this point. I go back down to the department and my coworker asked what happened. And I told him. He says, "So they want everything done before we leave?" I said, "Yep," and without another word, he knew what we needed to do. 9 p.m. hits as usual, and our shelves are at the usual standard of half full. But seeing as we've been given a new standard, we decided to stay and make sure we did what I was instructed to do. We spent the next several hours past closing time slicing and slicing and slicing until every single tray of meat and cheese was full. We had plastic totes in the big fridge full of cheese that we sliced that were wrapped up in half-pound blocks for ease of sale. So we decided to fill that tub over the brim with every single type of cheese we had available. We cut up around 70 pounds of cheese and wrapped it up in the fridge. We also had a Subway-style sandwich counter where we made sandwiches to order and also pre-made on the shelves for sale. We made double the usual amount of sandwiches and filled the shelves, as per requested. Not a single shelf had a single empty spot on it by the time we were done. After every single possible item and shelf was as full as it could be, we finally started to clean and close. It was around 3 a.m. when we finally left. The department opens at 5 a.m. We were exhausted, but our spiteful overtime venture made us feel pretty good. We got about 6 hours overtime in. They hated anyone getting even 5 to 10 minutes of overtime. We both came in the next day at 1 p.m. as usual, expecting complete retaliation. But nope, instead, our department manager of the deli kindly saunters over to us and says, "Hey, you should be good to start cleaning up at 8:30 like usual. I think she, the director, got the point you made. Normally, overtime would be asked to be taken care of by clocking out for lunches or coming in later than usual, but they let us keep all 6 hours of that overtime. They never said anything to us about overtime again after that. I accepted a job that paid almost double about 6 months after this incident and never ever went back to retail hell. It sounds to me like the big boss in that store doesn't know how their own store runs. You'd think they'd have to have at least some kind of a grip on scheduling in the different departments. I know they have different department managers and whatnot, but in order to effectively run a place, you have to know how it works. I do love the fact that the boss gave them all those hours for overtime and didn't say a word about it. That was a respectable play. This next story comes to us from Jimothy Riggins. Take away my company car, I'll just fly everywhere. Let's jump right in. First, this isn't the company I work for, but a company that services the same customers, and I interact quite often with their sales team. For a little backstory, this job is a sales job, where you represent a manufacturer and travel around a territory calling on customers that sell your products. The territory is generally at least 2 states and averages 30,000 miles on the road per year, if not more. The company in question was recently acquired by a new ownership group that has a reputation for buying stagnant businesses, trimming down every possible expense they think is excessive, and selling it once it looks profitable, even though the company is barely functioning because of all the cuts. After the acquisition, the new ownership group decided that the sales reps' company cars were one of those excessive expenses. They were told to buy their own cars, and they'd be given a monthly allowance to pay for the vehicle. There's several problems. They drove at least 30,000 miles a year, so no matter what kind of car they bought, the car would depreciate in value very quickly, and they would likely need to trade it in a few years before it was paid off. Also, if they wanted to use exactly what their allowance would allow for a car, they'd likely be buying a 10 to 15-year-old beater, and it still wouldn't cover fuel and insurance. The sales reps were used to getting a new car every 2 to 3 years. It's important in this line of work to have a presentable car, because it's often used to take our customers around the market. For example, my company has a very strict policy about keeping the vehicles clean and will pay to repair any cracks in the windshield or dents in the car immediately, because we're a reflection of the company when meeting with our customers. It's just all around a situation where they're getting screwed over and would be spending their own money on something their old company used to cover, and it's essential to their job. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. This new company didn't have a policy on flights. There was no rule on how far the destination needed to be before they were allowed to book a flight. Also, they were allowed to rent a car if they flew to a destination. Finally, their company card approval system didn't have very good checks and balances because of the acquisition. Basically, all expenses were sent to an understaffed department. Some were laid off during the acquisition, so they'd approve all expenses as long as a receipt was provided. So now the sales reps are buying ridiculously expensive, super regional flights and just renting a car at the airport. One of the reps I sometimes bump into had just flown from Kansas City, Missouri to Wichita, Kansas, which is 2.5 to 3 hours away on the interstate. He then rented a car and drove back to Kansas City to make sales calls for 2 weeks. He ended up back in Wichita, making sales calls the whole way, and flew back to Kansas City to start the weekend. He'd been doing this every week for months. So was the rest of their sales force. He told me that his average daily travel expense was $50 more than the monthly allowance they gave him to buy a car. Apparently, the new company just caught on towards the end of the year, and their year-end travel expenses for them are massive. Since the discovery, there's been multiple meetings, virtual town halls, and a ton of emails with new policies and procedures for taking flights and submitting expenses. The biggest win for them, though, is that at the beginning of this year, they all got company cars again. Ah yes, a professional and lawful revenge that ended up with actually teaching something to the people running the company. It amazes me how many stories we get where the bosses just don't seem to have any communication with the numbers people, and they make stupid decisions that put the company in a bad spot. This next story comes to us from Obese Fitness. I have called in sick at work for the past 3 years. Let's jump right in. Backstory: 4 years ago, corporate introduced a new system for calling in sick. Before, you simply texted or called anyone on your team, and they told everyone at the morning meeting. You now had to call a service, wait in line on the phone, and then speak to a nurse. This results in an automated email to your manager saying employee X is out sick and expected back in Y days. Conflict: the first time I got sick after this, I realized what a pain in the butt the phone call was. When I got back to work, nothing happened for a few days. But then, the HR rep in my department came into my office and told me I also had to call in healthy. Okay, I called in healthy. I then called payroll as I didn't want to have an issue with the extra sick leave. Payroll told me that their system was not integrated with the call service for sick leave. They only used the regular timesheets. I now realized that this system was just to gather statistics and had no practical use. This kinda pissed me off, since the old system worked just as great for my team and was easier to deal with. Cue malicious compliance. The next time I got sick, I called in using the service. This time, I was sick for over 7 days, which meant that the system sent HR a reminder that I needed a doctor's note. I think this is what caused HR to come by the last time I was sick. I had a doctor's note when I got back to work, but I never called in healthy. The system didn't send out any more emails. This was in 2019. Last week, corporate gave a presentation on healthy work life, which basically went over sick leave statistics and showed their target goals of how low it should be. All of the goals were met in 2021, except for average number of sick days per employee. They also had a scatter plot graph over the distribution of sick leave. There was a big blob between 0 and 10, and some dots leading up to 30, and then nothing aside from one dot all the way out on the edge at 365. I did the math in my head, and if my 365 had been the actual number it was supposed to be, all metrics would have been met, and the VP that pushed for this BS would probably get a bigger bonus. I couldn't stop smiling. You'd think after seeing a number that was so much further out there than anybody else's numbers, that they would have looked in to see if that data point was accurate at all. But I guess that would require the people in upper management to actually have a grip on statistics, and we know how often that happens. This next story comes to us from Chaos Engine. How badly our vendors are screwing up directly relates to our departmental performance? Okay, sure, let's jump right in. I saw another post that jogged loose another instance of malicious compliance for my current job. No epic fallout, just a long trail of management showing they have no idea what they're doing. Background. Starting 5 years ago, supply chain teams claims to be tracking performance metrics to target areas for improvement. Translation. Everyone is going to be asked to push out a bunch of new reports in addition to our regular duties to go to management, which they're going to do nothing with. One of the metrics my team's management chose to track for performance was the number of weekly back orders our vendors are hitting us with for the supplies that inevitably go into caring for patients. Now, to be clear, the performance being tracked is not the vendors. That would be silly. Instead, it's supposed to track whether or not the guy following up on back orders is doing his job chasing them, and can be used to terminate him if he's not resolving back orders fast enough. That's me, by the way. The original metric was to publish the stock status report I work off of to provide the entire department a snapshot of what's coming in, when, and how close to stocking out we are. So far, so good. However, for reference, at any one time, the average number of open items en route to us is between 400 to 600 products, of which 20% are usually backordered for some reason or another, so between 100 and 120 line items per week. However, completely out of thin air, management decided that it was apparently fair for the target to be set to an average of 10 back orders per week. Most likely, most of you have figured out the problem with this target. You can't track our performance based on the actions of our vendors. I literally cannot force suppliers to maintain supply on their items. And since we have a policy of not canceling back orders when they occur, because our ERP system doesn't have subs set up properly for 99% of the items in it, it would be impossible to prevent that number from routinely being over 10 on a weekly basis. It could maybe be done if we did cancel back orders and replace them with substitute products not on back order, but that's not allowed. I pointed this out in a meeting with them, so they agreed that the report would be pared down to looking at items that were only going to stock out in the next 3 days, according to forecasting. They then asked if it would be possible to report less than 10 back orders when only looking at that 3-day window. I said sure, I can report 10 back orders or less each week based on that scope, but that wouldn't mean I'm not doing my job if it goes over. It just meant that our vendors were having a rougher time, and this is especially prevalent for periods like, the pandemic, where supply on anything is hard to come by and back orders are everywhere. None of which is the buyer's fault, so long as they're resolving those problems in a timely manner. I then suggested a different solution. Why not, instead, track the average number of items ending up in a defined number of days on hand, a low stock range, on a weekly basis, and use that as the metric for improvement, not number of back orders. This way they could ensure I'm chasing the back orders and resolving them in a timely manner. But also in the cases where we were carrying so little stock on hand that it was impossible to keep them out of the low stock status, that would be an indicator that we needed to be ordering and holding more on shelf. That way, the goal would be to reduce the report to 0 items, as stock levels were adjusted to account for delays. Then, if anything slipped onto the report, it meant the guy chasing back orders was at fault if they didn't get resolved before stocking out. because he had plenty of time to respond to the back orders. Did I mention management sets the shelf quantities, and they do it exclusively based on what they have in the budget, not how long it takes items to arrive or our usage rate? The blank stare I got from my boss when I pointed this out went to show that she had no idea what I was talking about. And I was just told to leave reporting to status quo, and they'd track number of back orders across a 3-day period. The compliance. So I did, and pumped out a report twice a week detailing what items are running out in the next 3 days. And for the next 6 months of this nonsense, we never went above the backorder target once. Because while we may have 30 items down to 3 days stock on hand, half of those will be because we literally carry less than 3 days on hand at any one time and haven't even generated an order yet, and they'll stock out before the vendor delivers them. Another 10 will be simply caused by the turnaround time for a vendor to process an order we placed, like yesterday, or shipping errors where something got screwed up, which causes things to stock out. And the last 5 are back orders that need resolved, or have already been resolved and we're just waiting for the solution to arrive to our doorstep. Fallout. My management thought this was going so well after 6 months, they decided to expand the scope of the report I produce to 5 days into the future, so everything on shelf stocking out in the next 5 days, without shifting the target to accommodate the new increased scope. They also didn't take into account the fact that the pandemic has massively impacted supply chains, meaning the report now starts at closer to 50 items at a time versus the 30 it was before, with 3 times as many back orders. So now, it takes roughly 2 hours per issue to siphon through and confirm exactly what's going on with each item and ensure 100% they'll arrive before stocking out. So to recap, my management are paying roughly $100 a week in wages to receive a personalized report they could print raw from the system in 30 seconds. That tells them nothing they don't already know, and upon which they can't enact any performance improvements because they're tracking the one item on the report that is by and large outside of our control, while ignoring the ones that would be a quick in-system fix if they'd take 10 seconds to look at them. I pity our patients. I have absolutely no experience in the job you're doing. I don't know the first thing about it, honestly, but I completely understood what you were saying, and I don't understand how your manager couldn't figure it out. Check out all 5 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.